Thank you, everybody. Such a privilege to be able to crash the family party. Thanks for having me. It's such a privilege to be sharing this moment with you, to present this talk on Beethoven and his piano music. And I'd like to thank a hearty word of gratitude, express a word of gratitude to the Templeton Foundation, to Tim and the whole team, Joanna, Ben, Jennifer, and a host of others who have made this evening possible. As always, it takes a village to pull these things off. And so thankful for your investment in community. I arrived this morning having taken a plane from University of Freiburg, I should say, in Switzerland, and was really grateful for the fact that folks in Copenhagen believe in air conditioning. A major turn of experiential events for me. This morning you enjoyed expositions on uncertainty in several different disciplinary contexts. Offerings that have led your hearts and minds to enter the world and wonder of the cosmos, our earth, our human nature. And now I'm going to turn the lens of uncertainty on the story of a life as expressed through music. Tonight's talk, as Tim has shared with you, is titled Uncertainty as Invitation, Beethoven's Piano Works and the Poetics of Sabbath Rest. In the world of classical music, Ludwig van Beethoven's story captures most vividly what it means to face uncertainty over the course of decades and arrive at a season of peace. In fact, there's a moment in the last movement of his penultimate piano sonata, it's the 31st of 32, in A-flat major, opus 110, where I believe this peace literally came upon him. And in this moment, everything stops. Not in the way that music pauses between phrases, but in the way that a great sorrow ceases to be. The melody, which has been climbing with enormous effort, gives way to a fugue of architectural severity and suddenly collapses. And then the melody reappears, and after 10 thunderous G major chords separated by rests, gives way to another fugue texture. But this time, the fugue utterly transforms the tone of the music. I want to suggest to you today that what happens in those measures is not merely musical. It is, in the deepest sense of the word, Shabbat Menucha. Rabbi Abraham Yashua Heschel, writing in 1951, opens his meditation on the Sabbath with a startling claim. He says that the Sabbath is not a day of rest in the ordinary sense. It is not recuperation for the work week ahead. It is a foretaste of eternity, a weekly rehearsal of what the Jewish tradition calls the world to come. And the quality of that rest, its Hebrew name menucha, means inner tranquility, serenity, peace, and repose of the spirit. The words of St. Augustine in his Confessions ring true here as well. Thou madest us for thyself, and our heart is restless until it reposes in thee. So my point this evening is that Ludwig van Beethoven, who was Catholic, who went deaf, who raged against fate with almost a terrifying anger, expressed in 2 piano sonatas, separated by nearly 2 decades or 20 years, the journey to Menucha. And understanding this theology illuminates these works in ways that music analysis alone cannot. The tragic dimension of his story and the period of greatest uncertainty begins as early as 1796, when he was 26 years old. And this is when he first sensed that he was losing his hearing. He was an irascible guy, defiant, and yet fully aware of his potential to carry forth the mantle of Franz Joseph Haydn and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart as the next great composer to take Vienna, the then 19th century cultural capital of Europe, by storm. His Pathetique Sonata in C minor, the tragic key in his lexicon of harmonic affect, was composed in 1798, when he sensed that the hearing loss was real, a true harbinger of things to come. And before I play the opening of the Pathetique Sonata, I want you to see this painting on an ivory medallion of Beethoven in 1802. So he was 32 years old, as close to 1798 as I could get, to show you what he looked like, that sort of energy, determination, and intensity. So here's how the Pathetique Sonata begins. As I mentioned, it's in C minor, and C minor is this key of tragedy for him. I want you to notice in this slow introduction, which will lead to the fast portion of the movement, that it starts with three very pithy and weighty questions, followed by pregnant pauses. The rests, literally, complete the sentence or the statement. Rests in music, by the way, are just as important as the notes. In fact, sometimes even more important. And it's in the spaces where interpreters like pianists, violinists, cellists, musicians actually begin to invest their interpretive sort of perspective in the music. So here's how it begins. And listen to how he asks an existential question 3 times, separated by pauses. And that's how it begins. And you should know this slow introduction that happens before the official start of the movement was unprecedented in solo piano literature. What he demonstrates here is a keen ability to extract drama. In other words, to create potential energy for that kinetic energy that is to follow, to create anticipation for something that's really unexpected, okay? So this is how the movement really starts. Okay, it's the picture of anxiety, angst, tension, a lack of rest, anything but Shabbat Menucha. And then what happens is in the next movement, he toys with the notion of tranquility and calm. So he migrates from the key of C minor to A flat major. So you should know that this tradition of assigning harmonic areas to a particular emotional affect goes all the way back to the Baroque era. It's the doctrine of Baroque affections, meaning that certain harmonies, melodic gestures, rhythms actually are assigned to specific feelings. So the second movement goes like this, and know this, Beethoven was a master of casting drama over many movements. In other words, he doesn't just resolve it within a singular movement as Mozart or Haydn would. He casts this vision across large-scale architecture, okay? So here's the second movement in A flat major. Very famous second movement. For those of you who knew Karl Haas, who had a radio show, you know, it would start with this music. And he'd say, "Good evening, everyone," on this radio show, right? So, but this is the famous theme, and here's how it goes. I want you to make a mental note of the fact that the piece in the first movement started way down here in the bass, right? The antidote of peace and calm and tranquility also happens way down here in the bass. He could have done, right? He could have used the treble bass for this soaring, beautiful melody. He doesn't, and there's a reason, because he's using the register of the keyboard to demonstrate something, which will become apparent in just a moment. The third movement of this piece returns to the dastardly key of C minor. Again, tragedy, okay? And it's a rondo form, meaning that this theme, this rondo theme, which I'm about to play, comes back over and over, comes around and around again as a way of building cohesion into the piece. And in between, he inserts contrasting sections, okay? So this is the rondo theme in C minor. Again, anxious. Okay? And then he goes to a contrasting section. Well, in the dead center of that movement, you know what he does? Look what great abstract storytelling he's capable of doing. He inserts this in A flat major. Notice the register. Way down in the bass. And what he's basically saying is, I am migrating towards this state of tranquility and calm, in spite of these rondo sections, which are tragically cast in the key of C minor. So now the question is, what's going to win out? Is it the tragic experience, the anxiety, the angst, or is it the menucha that he longs for? Well, here's how the movement ends, and you tell me. In the most unexpected way, he goes to E flat major, which is the dominant of the 5 of A flat. I'm way down in this register. Remember, he's recalling. And then he does it again. like, wow, maybe tranquility will win? Forget about it. No way. Not in this lifetime. So that takes me to this statement, because that piece was composed in 1798. Just a few years later, he penned the Heiligenstadt Testament in 1802. And by this time, he senses for sure that he's going to become completely deaf. And here's what he writes. This is a letter that he had written for his brothers that he had wanted them to discover upon his death. But what a humiliation for me when someone standing next to me heard a flute in the distance and I heard nothing. Or someone heard a shepherd singing and again I heard nothing. Such incidents drove me almost to despair. A little more of that, and I would have ended my life. It was only my art that held me back. Oh, it seemed impossible to me to leave this world before I had produced all that I felt capable of producing. And so I prolonged this wretched existence, truly wretched, for so susceptible a body that a sudden change can plunge me from the best into the worst of states. Divine One, thou seest my inmost soul, and thou knowest that therein dwells the love of humanity and the desire to do good. Now, these are just small extractions from a very lengthy letter. So 1802 is known as sort of the pinnacle of his crisis. And what follows 1802 is a rash of very inspired works. You know, you think of his Fifth Symphony, right? Right? Or his Eroica Symphony. Or his Emperor Concerto. His Violin Concerto goes on and on and on. His Razumovsky String Quartets. He entered a phase of extraordinary energy. And it was because he felt like he needed to produce in this moment of urgency with this diminishing hearing everything that he could produce. So somehow there was this burst of energy. And this is what we know of as his middle period. Fast forward, by 1815, he's completely deaf. And what follows is his sort of, he pulls away from the world and he enters an inner life that was very deep, isolating, but telling. He decides to write not for the public anymore, but for the connoisseur. And he was sort of liberated to chase his sort of mind's ear toward innovations that were unprecedented. In many ways, his deafness, his silence, catapulted him into a spiritual realm that was really heretofore unknown in classical music, which is why Beethoven has become so popular. It's because he has revealed so much of himself in the music, not just the general style or aesthetic of the day. He reveals at the core vulnerability. Okay, so as we move forward, here is a painting by Joseph Stieler of Beethoven, close to the end of his life, within a few years of the end. And this is while he was writing a famous work called the Missa Solemnis, his solemn mass. Now, to do that, to sort of embark on this massive musical undertaking, he started to study in depth Handel's Messiah oratorio, because he was a great admirer of George Friedrich Handel's compositional abilities. And you'll see in this painting that he's writing in a score. On that manuscript, Stieler captures the first three words of the credo movement of the Mass, C-R-E. So in the Catholic Mass, you have the Kyrie, Gloria, the credo, the Sanctus, and the Agnus Dei. So the credo is the movement where the Catholic creeds are set to music, the beliefs, the foundational beliefs. And this is what starts to then flow into all of his other types of music. Sacred music, as found in the Missa Solemnis, in the form of recitative, aria, and fugue, starts to appear in his music. That's unprecedented, where you take another musical genre, sacred music, oratorios or masses, right? Where you have an orchestra, you have singers, and they're singing sacred texts, and you start to spill those textures into piano music, string quartets, his Ninth Symphony. This was so bizarre, forward thinking, right? Innovative. Before I go there, however, I need to tell you a little bit about the Opus 110, which is a sonata in A flat major, folks, okay? This was composed in 1821, just 6 years before his death. A flat major is the key of peace and tranquility. Who would have thunk it, in the context of the Pathetique Sonata, which was fully in C minor, where A flat major didn't have a chance. But here he expounds on the power and beauty of A flat major. But let's see how he does this, okay? Very cleverly, Beethoven, who has a sense of humor as well as a sense of the divine, uses two vernacular tunes in the context of the second movement. And what he's going to do is he's going to pair these profane tunes of the second movement with their sacred versions in the third movement, okay? So you guys are a serious lot here. If you see something like Unser Katzen gehabt, our cat had kittens, you'd think you'd laugh, right? So here you go. Unser Katzen gehabt. And I want you to follow the syllabic rhythm because the music is mirroring the text, right? And what you see here is a kind of descending scalar pattern. It goes down 6 pitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? That's one profane tune. And then the second one is Ich bin luderlich, du bist luderlich. I'm a Slav, you're a Slav too, okay? Okay, so note the syllabic rhythm. Ich bin luderlich, du bist luderlich. So the music is following that syllabic impulse. Let me play a little bit of the second movement so you get a sense of how sort of profane, jaunty, kind of in your face this music is, right? It's not what you think of when you think of serious classical music, right? Ich bin luderlich. You get the idea. He's just having jolly fun watching these patterns run up and down the keyboard, and it seems almost ridiculous, right? And you think, where can this ridiculousness lead? Well, it leads to the sublime. And this is how he segues to the sacred. He's a master of transitions, by the way. How do you go from hilarity to the sacred, right? Let me play the very ending of this movement so you get a sense. And now the third movement with no break. And here is where he introduces the first of three important textures in sacred music. It's called recitative. Recitative is the musical equivalent of spoken text. The pitches and the rhythms sound like someone speaking, okay? So here goes. So just for fun, if I were to sort of put on the Beethovenian hat and assign words to these pitches, this recitative section, it would be something like this. I'm so done now, really finished with living. Okay, so you get the idea, right? Spoken text. And in an oratorio, you would hear a 5-1. And then you would hear an aria. And this is the aria that he unleashes. Again, this is from sacred music. Aria is song. And he writes, klangender Gesang, arioso dolente. This is a really sorrowful tune. You got to watch out when he combines German and Italian, right, in the instructions. He really means it. He's trying to lend certain specificity in the interpretation when he combines languages like that. And so what you notice in the aria, it is an emotional outpouring. We'll understand the nature of this emotional outpouring in just a second, but I want you to notice something in terms of its construction. It goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Does that sound familiar? Our cat had kittens, now cast in this incredibly emotional outpouring, okay? So what follows recitative aria? What's the third component of this? Could have that last slide again. That last component is fugue. And why fugue? Do folks here know what a fugue is? I'm going to explain it in just a second, okay? So fugue is really the technique that separates the men from the boys, the women from the girls. It's very rigorous, and the best composers master fugue technique. A fugue is, in simplest terms, where you roll out a theme. In this case, it's an A flat major. It goes like this. And then a second voice comes in, a fifth higher, and it imitates it while the original voice goes on with new material. And then a third voice comes in. Can you hear all the entrances of the fugue theme? It's basically a tapestry of woven lines with these staggered entrances. It's very difficult to accomplish well. We'll also know that the fugue in his day was symbolic of God's moral and universal order. And it makes sense, right? Because it's such a rigorous technique. So you've had recitative, spoken text, you've had this emotional outpouring in the form of the aria, and now you have this representation or symbolic representation of God's moral and universal sovereignty or order. But notice what this fugue theme is made of. These are fourths. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Those are the same fourths that come from Ich bin luderlich, du bist luderlich. You catch my drift? There's sort of this constructive consistency, right? Motivic consistency. But the fact is that those motives were cast in the profane have now been transformed toward the sacred, right? Okay, so now here's how the fugue ends. And then we're going to say, all right, once we get to E flat, which is the dominant of A flat, right? Then we're going to be in home territory, back in A flat major, right? It must be the end of the piece. Hooray, we can go home now, right? But this is how it goes. And now we could go, hooray, we're done, right? Instead, he does this. He goes to G minor. He sinks it down 1/2 step from A flat to G minor, okay? Oh my goodness, it's the aria again. That very vulnerable human outpouring of emotion. And this time he writes, ermattet klangend, like he's going pale, perdendo le forze dolente. You're losing strength, barely alive, just hanging on by your nails, okay, to life. Wow. So this emotional outpouring, you think, wait a minute, I thought we got past the recitative, we had the aria and the fugue, we introduced God's moral and universal sovereignty and order, so now what's going on? Well, it's almost as if he sunk to even lower depths of sadness and loss. But all of a sudden, and this is the moment that I had referenced in the introduction, there's this extraordinary musical event of 10 G major chords separated by rests. Unprecedented, okay? So let me lead you into that moment. Still the aria. There's one. And you think, what can follow that? He's moved from G minor to G major. Did you hear that difference? Which is a little bit brighter. You said, oh, maybe something hopeful is coming, right? And then you hear another fugue. Notice these are fourths again, like ich bin luderlich, du bist luderlich. But this time it's descending. It's coming down, right? And now the fugue theme is rising, okay? And when you least expect it, he suddenly gives these instructions, slow down. And this appears. What was that? It's the reference, I'm a Slav, you're a Slav. Ich bin luderlich, du bist luderlich. Can you hear the syllabic rhythm of that? Inserted after this glorious fugue that descends to earth. And then what follows is a triumphant return of the fugue theme. Can you hear that? But this time in octaves and in the bass, right, with great power. So what has happened? It seems that those 10 G major chords, okay, one noted musicologist theorizes that this was actually the crucifixion for Beethoven in his Catholic faith. He had discovered the tradition of the Catholic creed, and it had become a very personal realization to him. You see, he came under the tutelage of Johann Michael Saylor, who was a noted Catholic Enlightenment scholar and theologian. And he began to embrace his Catholic faith in a very personal way. So this narrative is really, in many ways, biographical, autobiographical for Beethoven. If you want to read more about this, there's a new book by Nicholas Chong. It's called The Catholic Beethoven. It was just released last year through Oxford University Press that I would encourage if you're interested. So we have recitative, emotional outpouring of aria, fugue, God's sovereign moral and universal order. Then we have the music sinking in half step down to G minor. We have, again, a vulnerable aria, which was made up of that sixth, like Our Cat Had Kittens, right? The same motivic elements. And then the return of another fugue based on I'm a Slav, you're a Slav. And then the recitation, the literal recitation of I'm a Slav, you're a Slav, right before the final triumphant fugue. Now, I want to share this anecdote with you that was first written about by Alexander Thayer, who's the 19th century biographer of Beethoven's. And he said that this was born out of personal experience. The insertion of I'm a Slav, you're a Slav comes from his own experience. He was walking down a street in Vienna and peering through the window of a noble person's home. And a policeman came up and said, "Who are you?" And Beethoven writes on his slate, because remember, he's deaf, "I'm Herr Beethoven." And he says, "You are not Beethoven, you're a Slav." Okay? So he actually experienced that insult. And that insult is cast in the context of this piece. But that insult doesn't have a last word. It's the triumphant fugue theme which finishes us out. So what I'm going to do is play this final section, the fugue theme as it returns after the 10 G major chords, leading to the triumphant fugue statement, which is the conclusion. Thank you. And there you have it. A flat was triumphant, the key of peace, calm, and tranquility. So now I'm going to close this session out by offering a musical benediction, also in A flat major, written by Schumann originally as a song, okay, for voice and piano, that was then taken by a composer named Franz Liszt, who was a piano virtuoso, and he took the voice out of it, right, and basically creates a solo piano piece. It's called a transcription, all right, of this song. So Widmung means devotion and dedication. And at the very end, Schumann closes it out with a little snippet of the Ave Maria. So this is what the final piece to close out the evening.